So we are in a new edition of Late Night Anarchy, and we are with Stephen Kent, which is the public relations manager at John Voices and the co-host of Belway Banthas to talk about Star Wars and politics. And he has been writing and being a guest in several programs with the issue of Star Wars and politics. So how you started to being interested first in Star Wars and then into politics? How in some moment you try to match that interest together?
Hey there. So yeah, I mean, I think I fell into Star Wars as most kids do. You just, someone hands you the tape cassette and you just watch it and you wear it out, and you just fall in love with the idea of being in another world and another galaxy. I think I got interested in politics because I'm sick in the head and something's wrong with me. If you you start falling in love with politics, there's something wrong with you. So no, but in the prequel era, when I was watching Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, I mean, you notice that this movie is highly political and has some relevant messages. And so when I was in college, I started seeing some overlap of ways in which Star Wars and politics are always talking about one another. So I had the idea of starting a podcast dedicated to blending the two because it seemed like nobody was doing that. And since I am a free markets guy, I think I have an eye for a niche and saw that no one was filling this market, so I did.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean I was born in 1990, so the first film that I watched were the new trilogy. But I remember that something very funny happened in Peru. That was the first lady jumped in a line in the premiere. I think it was episode 2, and it was kind of a polemic. And I remember from that I kind of have the idea that Star Wars have some kind of political implication because I mean it was an hour, like 3 or 4 hours, the the line for the premiere, and it was kind of interesting, to see the president, the first lady, making queue for so much time to watch Star Wars. It was very curious.
Yeah, politicians love to go out and see Star Wars. One, I think it just speaks to the American people in particular. We can talk about it internationally as well, but I mean, going out to see the most popular movie in the world is something that politicians do to, try to connect with people and remind them that they're just like them and they go see the same movies that they do and they're concerned about the same things. And so I always loved that. And, Barack Obama, more so than the Bushes, was a president who I think understood that and was good at connecting with people on that level.
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking about, like the medium. I went last week to see the new movie, and the in general, most cinemas here are having it with subtitles, dubbed, and in 3D version. So an average of more or less all cinemas are with Star Wars now, and in Latin America, it's becoming more and more of a huge deal, as Nolan Gray was of also Young Voices was pointing out. A lot of malls are opening in Latin America, and most malls have cinemas in there. So there are a lot of much more cinemas, and generally the cinemas that are opening are not necessarily art house cinemas, but cinemas who cater for more broad audience, and that includes science fiction particularly. And obviously Star Wars is kind of their best time of the year because it's I think the only other film who has had the kind of commercial success as Star Wars has been Twilight, probably. But then, I mean, there hasn't been another film that has been as close, at
Yeah,
least here in the.
absolutely. That's entirely true.
Yeah, so I was thinking in how to see Star Wars and politics from the international relations vision, because sometimes I have seen that a lot of the dialogue have been more focused on domestic politics, but the issue of international relations is a very curious thing. I was mentioning that the what Belway Banthas retweeted the article about the relationship with Star Wars and the Iraq War, and it was very interesting to see that kind of relationship. I think Saddam was a fan of Star Wars, if I'm not wrong. It was kind of like strange. He put the Star Wars songs before the war. It was really strange and something that I would consider unexpected, and how Star Wars is influencing people from in very unlikely places.
Yeah, I mean it's an international tale, and I think it's always important to remember that Star Wars is an international film. This is not just made for American audiences. And sometimes when we talk about and review this movie in the States, we get incredibly self-important about, like, oh, it's about Republicans and Democrats. It's like, no, it's about freedom versus tyranny, and that is a universal human struggle. And even the very first Star Wars movie was meant to sort of speak to America's role abroad, and it's meddling in Vietnam, and like that's where the Ewoks, like, they came from. So this is a movie that is meant to speak to everyone's concerns. Even in Rogue One, when you had, the Empire rolling through the streets of Jeddah, and insurgents who work for Saw Gerrera throwing a grenade underneath the tank. I mean, that should resonate with you, I mean, just very visually, from like any Iraq War movie that has ever come out in the past 10 years of sort of Middle Eastern insurgents fighting against an occupying force. And it's offensive on some level to, like, consider, in my view, to paint the United States as an equivalent to the empire. But to folks abroad, we are the empire. We're an occupying force. We're hostile, and we are, strangers carrying guns and covered in armor. So I mean, to an Iraqi, yeah, we're stormtroopers walking through the streets of Iraq. So, sometimes you just have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes and consider the way that they see it. Might be best to, consider what Obi-Wan said. Everything is, true to a certain person's point of view.
Yeah, something that I consider very interesting about Star Wars is the issue that is a cosmopolitan global tale, because it's not necessarily about race or the kind of groups that form in one side or another are more of the ideas that at least the leadership shares, not a race base of relationship, and that is probably the greatest contrast between Star Wars and Star Trek. I suppose that has to do with the fact that Roddenberry was a huge fan of Nietzsche, and Nietzsche had a very strong ideas about culture, and, and that, I suppose, that make the idea that the is cultures fight with each other. I suppose that was what Roddenberry was trying to portray, I guess. But yeah, Star Wars is kind of a different kind of tale, and that is, I think, that has helped to be a global history, because it's in many ways the movie of globalization. In many ways, it was kind of the first international phenomenon, because there are movies that are very known in the United States and sometimes in America, in Latin America or in other places, are didn't even open.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the prequels came out, the Revenge of the Sith was being lauded by, folks in Eastern Europe as being a tale that sort of spoke to their concerns about Russia and the rise of Putin in the early, to mid 2000s. So this movie just means different things to different people. Do you see any sort of like specific do you see any sort of specific interpretation of this movie in South America?
I mean, I feel that the issue was what in the Cold War era, Latin America, the basically the governments were very fragile. There were a lot of coups, that and I feel that without, I mean, United States has a lot of problems, but I don't think that kind of stuff is something that is common to the realities of people in the United States. So I feel that that was something that probably Latin American audience were seeing as more likely in many ways.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I was also going to tell about how like Star Wars has been a very important component about what now is called geek culture, before was called nerd culture. But the issue about, for example, like in the 90s when I was born, nerd was a term that was used to refer someone who read a lot, not necessarily the same thing that the United States. I think that for some reason was the same translation when they referred to someone that like comics or other things, but it was not the same. But now I think that is kind of a global idea, and there were some years ago a lot of two articles that spoke a lot about the issue that geeks have won the cultural war, that and it pointed out to the X-Men films a lot, and to the issue with the new superhero movies, but it almost missed fundamentally Star Wars, and I think it was kind of a mistake, because in many ways Star Wars paved the way to the geek culture that we live now. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's very impressive how it has changed the picture of many things, because the I remember still in the early 90s when I was a kid. I mean, when people refer to Star Wars or it's still general in sci-fi was kind of more of a kids or teenagers thing. But when the new trilogy was open in Peru, a lot of the public were people that were from other generations. So it was kind of a
Yeah.
it like G culture has started to move from the age spectrum of kids or teenagers, and it has become very mainstream
Oh
in a
yeah, I mean
way.
that's 100% true. And when Beltway Banthas was doing our live show in DC last week, somebody in the audience had asked a question, and they had made a joke. They're like, we kind of like all of us who are here like to pretend we're sort of part of some subculture of Star Wars nerddom, but it's nice to remember that we're fans of the most popular movie in the world. Star Wars is not geeky, nerdy, or like a subculture. It is the most popular and beloved film franchise in the world. And we have a huge underbelly of really, really deep fans who are like, like they know everything about Star Wars back and front. But, almost everybody in the world considers themselves to be a fan of Luke, Leia, Darth Vader in some way, like just anecdotally. Everybody knows it. So, yeah, I mean, Star Wars mainstreamed geek culture in a huge way, and Comic Con, is now a massive shared cultural event where tons of people go and enjoy things like comic book conventions. And when Star Wars had first come out in 1977, San Francisco Comic Con was being held in like a basement of a building. It was very, very small. And now, San Francisco Comic Con is a international event that shuts down the entire city for a whole day. So, this is a rising subculture, and it has made Marvel and Disney, some of the most successful, franchise holders in the world.
But I was thinking also with the Disney purchase, probably one of the things that was more clear was that that Star Wars will remain family friendly, because I think the last of the new trilogy, Episode 3, if I'm not wrong, was in some countries it has air as because of the violence, was in some countries for people older than 18 to watch it, the category. So I think I don't think it would have go as Deadpool or other films, but if Disney wouldn't have bought, I think that probably would have seen if Lucasfilm would have decided to do their films of their own. It's not impossible to think that we would have seen uh, a Star Wars dealing with other kind of issues. And I don't know. Do you have any clue if that's will have any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I share the concern that Star Wars could like broach like a unfamily friendly movie at some point. I mean, to be honest, Rogue One in many ways was a stretch, just like that level of in the trenches, gun violence was new for Star Wars, and Darth Vader, hacking up the rebels in that way, like he did in Rogue One, was again a new level of upfront violence that we haven't seen in Star Wars before. And I was concerned taking my 5 year old to go see that, and so I was like, I'm kind of worried about this. And even in the Last Jedi this week, there were some particular like more violent scenes than we've ever seen in a Star Wars chapter movie, like episodes one through 8. So I think the culture in general is always leaning towards upping the ante on violence. But, with these Star Wars movies that come out in between each chapter, like the Han Solo movie, I think that we should prepare ourselves at some point for new genres. And one of those genres might be dark comedy with a little bit of, added violence. So anything could happen, Camilo, anything could happen.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I mean, in many ways, it will have changed. I mean, Disney now has a lot of power, and I think that there was an indie film director that was saying that um, he directed a film some years ago called Slash, and he was saying that basically um, every kind of aspect of Sikh culture has become mainstream, and he was saying that the only thing that he think that wouldn't be mainstream is the kind of uh, of a slash fiction, like this kind of fans who write their own stories, generally of erotic material, and I was thinking that yes, I mean it's probably that's the only genre that will be like will be kind of marginalized, but in general, all elements of Deadpool and even like the latest X-Men films that has been like I don't know, they're rated films that Disney it will be produced. It's really a very complex issue in how to deal to different publics and how to reach to different publics without
Yeah.
alienating others. Because sometimes X-Men still has some more friendly comics and some video game or things, and it's kind of
Yeah,
extreme.
like X-Men, Days of Future Past, and the movies that came in that sort of string of movies were not well received. They were relatively kiddish. They had kid gloves on. They were light, and really nobody liked them. And so what was the most beloved X-Men movie of the recent past? Logan, the most brutal X-Men themed movie that we've ever had. And also, I don't know if you saw this, but X-Men is coming out with a horror movie. Have you seen the poster or teaser for this?
The like how it's called.
Like called New Mutants or something?
Yeah, the trailer. I have seen it. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
it's
X-Men is going to have a movie that takes place in like a mental kind of hospital for mutants. It's going to be like a horror film, and so that could tell you a little bit about the future of maybe something like Star Wars. Like eventually they're going to give us a smuggler movie, or a bounty hunter movie that's going to be brutal and not good for children.
yeah,
And I think at the end of the day, I do have concerns about the kid friendly legacy of Star Wars. I want it to remain family friendly because I'm boring. But there might be a market for gritty, bloody Star Wars movies, and if that's what the market wants, then that's what it will get.
yeah. It's always an interesting question. I don't know what you think about the concern that the same director was saying that, for example, the new Star Trek was trying to be like Star Wars. Do you think that other kind of adaptations of films will try to be like Star Wars? And in that part, some kind of these stories will distort itself, trying to be Star Wars, but having other kind of screenplays, other kind of characters, and it will distort the kind of, of
Yeah, are you talking about J.J. Abrams' Star Trek?
yes, he was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned with cross-pollination between franchises and each, major franchise losing its soul as they try to copy one another. And to be honest, The Last Jedi, this isn't a spoiler, like, it really borrowed from Marvel style humor. In many ways, the jokes and humor in The Last Jedi felt like the Guardians of the Galaxy. And that's new for Star Wars in a way that I didn't really like. I really think that Star Wars humor needs to be restrained and more subtle and not like haha that's you have you seen the movie yet?
Yes, I have seen.
Yeah, I thought the jokes just felt like Avengers and Galaxy Guardians of the Galaxy jokes, and I think that's a problem. So all these movies are going to sort of copy one another in a weird way, and I don't like that. But the way that the movie business is working these days is to empower franchise films, and franchise films are keeping the industry afloat. If these movies go away, the entire movie making industry is going to seriously go under. So they're going to do whatever makes them money, and if it's working, they'll just keep copying one another.
So how you see the relationship with the Star Wars could have with indie films, because the last Thor was directed by Taika Waititi, was a New Zealand filmmaker who has done small movies in New Zealand, and that has had some kind of success, but it were very small movies. It was a very limited budget, and then he was directing a millions dollar, $100 million film, and I don't know. I like Thor, but I don't know if you could do the same with Star Wars, putting a low budget filmmaker to try to do this. It will be kind of interesting, but on the same time, it will be kind of a strange in many ways.
Well, Kathleen Kennedy, who runs Lucasfilm, let's be honest, at the end of the day, they want a filmmaker that they can control. Um, Lucasfilm and Disney want a filmmaker who is ambitious, hungry, creative, and willing to play within their rules and their framework and the box that they create. And you had the guys like Lord and Miller who are working on the Han Solo movie get fired because they weren't playing by their rules. They were being too goofy with their script. They were doing too much improv comedy, and Kathleen Kennedy and Lawrence Kasdan, the Star Wars screenwriting veteran, felt like they could not be controlled, and so they're gone. And you also had that with Colin Trevorrow, where this is a blockbuster director. He did, Jurassic World, but he was described as having too much of an ego. That he was too big for his britches, and that he could not work in a team environment. So I actually think we're going to get good small indie directors who have a really strong artistic edge and are hungry to work on a big budget movie, because Kathleen Kennedy, I think, can work with those people.
That's interesting, because I sometimes feel that the first kind of large budget film that had more or less an inclination towards a more kind of indie perspective was Scott Pilgrim, but it went bad in the box office. It became a cool film, and it has, I think it's one of the most sell Blu-ray discs in the history of Amazon. But it's still, when it was initially released, it almost kind of tanked, and it's strange, that kind of thing. So I understand why big studios, not just with respect to Star Wars, kind of have some concerns over to giving too much time to a new director that they don't trust entirely. I mean, it's a huge property, and if things could go wrong, it could affect the entire Star Wars universe.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, but there are directors out there who can strike it.
So how do you were considered about J. Abrams' idea that he wanted to have not necessarily known actors for playing the roles in the more recent trilogy.
Yeah, well, that's consistent with George Lucas's approach to casting in the original trilogy. New faces, fresh actors, folks who don't have baggage in pop culture. And I'll tell you, for one, I like the prequels. I really enjoy those movies. But having Samuel L. Jackson as a Jedi is distracting. Uh, Samuel L. Jackson is a legacy character actor, and he doesn't belong in Star Wars. You're supposed to give people a blank slate when you go into a Star Wars movie, and you're not like, oh, that's Natalie Portman, oh, that's Ewan McGregor, oh, that's Samuel L. Jackson. Like, what, are we gonna have Tom Hanks next? Like, no. um, Cast new faces, because Star Wars and The Last Jedi was great about this on a message perspective. You're supposed to see yourself in the heroes, a hero with a blank face that you can project yourself onto. And you can't do that if Leonardo DiCaprio is the main character. So, that's something J.J. Abrams was absolutely right about. And I think it paid off because the actors in The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens are all fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although obviously Laura Dern is well known. I mean, she has been in a lot of films, but I think
Laura Dern, you said?
yes.
Yeah, that was a good supporting role. She was in the movie and then she was out of the movie, and so I feel like she didn't take away from anything at all. But I mean, like let's be honest, like she's not an A-list actress. I think she was an A-list actress of the '90s. I think she's a solid B-lister now, and so she's not. It's not like they brought in Jennifer Aniston. That would be a little bit different. But Laura Dern was great in the small role she played.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that it's uh, a lot of what you were of the things you were saying in our interviews. I think became reality in the Last Jedi, and it was very interesting. So, I wonder your predictions. Do you feel that at some moment the narrations and things that are more of not necessarily more kind of obscure things will emerge in the next kind of trilogies, if that will be the path for Star Wars?
What exactly is the question? I don't understand.
How you what do you have like any sense of what kind could be the next kind of trilogies after this trilogy?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Or
I
yes.
I will be honest and say I don't have any sense of what the stories or where they might go. What I do know is that Ryan Johnson has said that the Knights of the Old Republic, which is a fan favorite, like everybody loves those video games, and they sort of paint a picture of the old Republic of Star Wars. He has expressed that like he doesn't want to touch that part of the universe either because it is so beloved and it has history. And Ryan Johnson is going to want to do something brand new. And so all these requests coming in from fans to do an Old Republic story, I think will probably end up getting shot down. Man, who knows? I for one would love to see a Star Wars that takes place even before the Old Republic. So like think about like Star Wars Neolithic era, you know? So like Star Wars cavemen, like what was the galaxy like before, lightsabers? Like let's get a story about the Sith and the Jedi religion forming, and the Jedi religion being formed, and then the Sith breaking away from it, almost like a biblical, fall of Satan sort of thing, or a Cain and Abel sort of story. That could be really, really cool, and it could be Star Wars without lightsabers or laser guns. I think people would kind of be a little bit taken off guard by that, but man, I think that'd be neat.
Yes, that will be interesting. And I think with that we could, and obviously people should follow in you in Twitter, and and also follow Belway Banthas, which is a really interesting podcast for anyone who is interested in Star Wars and politics. So
Oh, well, thank
thanks.
you, Camilo. You can follow me on Twitter at Steven underscore Kent89. That's Steven underscore Kent89, and at Beltway Banthas. We look forward to chatting with you. We're on Twitter all the time, so we can't wait to have you follow.
So thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Camilla.